this panel is indeed a follow-on from the opening address of Chief Executive Liang, because it's virtually the same topic, which is the growth and integration of the Pearl River Delta. We will refer to the Pearl River Delta, see I can't even say it, as PRD. Most of you from here know that. If you've flown in from the Bohai Rim, you might not. So we'll use that acronym a fair amount. I have four very well-qualified panelists to speak on the topic. To my left is Rick Vogel, who's the president of Silverstein, China. Silverstein's a very well-known developer in the US, probably most notably for redevelopment of the World Trade Center site. And now they're active in China, as you will hear. To his left is Chiao, who's CEO Asia Pacific of AECOM, a major design and engineering firm, typically of the types of projects, the mega projects that we'll talk about on this panel. To his left is Zhiqiang of China Vanke, where he is the group chief planner and regional deputy general manager for the Shanghai region. And finally, Professor Michael Enright, who's a well-known professor at Hong Kong University's School of Business. He's also the director of Asia Pacific Competitiveness programs at the Hong Kong Institute of Economics. And finally, he's the director of Enright & Associates, his own strategy consulting firm. So what I'm going to do is invite each panelist to make an opening statement, if you will, to talk a little bit about themselves, their company, how that's relevant to the PRD. And I'm going to start with Sean, because Sean actually has a few slides to share with us. Then we'll finish the intros and have some Q&A. Sean, hang on one second. It's trapped. There, that's your clicker.
Right, you need that.
I've got more technology than the futurist was talking about this morning. So.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Chiao. I'm looking after the building and places market sector and AECOM throughout the entire Asia Pacific. This is a very big subject, how to accelerate the integration of Hong Kong and Pearl River Delta. I'm going to use a few slides to talk a little bit about the background or my understanding, and of course we're here to share with the panelists, and then to have a session to look into these issues together. There's a new terms you may heard we call New Long Kong. A few years ago people talk about BRICS. I think this is probably the most trendy term to share with you. New Long Kong is really talk about 3 city regions, and then if you slice the globe to 3 sections, that's America. That's Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and then that's Asia Pacific, include Australia and New Zealand. And these 3 cities, actually, people predict or hope will lead these 3 geographies in the world. That's New York, London, and Hong Kong. Just to look at the New York and Hong Kong, I mean, the area is relatively similar. We're talking about 35,000 square kilometers versus 40,000 square kilometers. But look at the population, it's quite significantly different. Let's look at the Pearl River Delta. And we understand, with that significant size of land and population, and we have so many cities, and then just name a few, and everybody is very familiar with Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and Macau. And of course, there are other cities people are familiar with, like Dongguan. But if you really drill down, every city is so different, from their personality, their character, and even their, GDP per capita. If you look at Hong Kong, it's about 55,000. And then Guangzhou is only 17,000. So when we're accelerating the integration, we have to understand these are very, very unique situations throughout the entire area. Hong Kong has been trying to understand these significant issues and then trying to build a vision with their growth. In 2007, they did the 2030 vision plan. And then 2009, and they did a study on the coordination development of the greater Pearl River Delta Township. And even up to now, they're still doing a big study on the how to basically the action plan for livable Bay Area of the Pearl River Delta. But it's not only that, but I think Hong Kong gradually understand in order to become really the center of the Asia Pacific, they need to change their mind from a gateway or springboard to become a fully integrated mega region or megatropolis, rather than see themselves as a very powerful city. So in order to do that, we understand this morning we talk about 1 hour living circle or 1 hour economic circles. And then, of course, connectivity becomes very important. Everybody understand the transportation infrastructure, including the Macau, Hong Kong, Zhuhai, Macau Bridge, and then also the Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Hong Kong Express Rail Link, and then also the cross-border facilities. And then the other thing is really, if we look at the other rail links, we have the Pearl River Delta commuter rail studies, and then also Shenzhen-Zhongshan Highway, as well as the Guangzhou and Shenzhen, the coastal highways as well. But not only the infrastructure, but we're also looking at the new towns or new cities. This morning, Honorable CY mentioned about Nansha. Nansha is about the 800 square kilometer land. And then we talk about Qianhai, is about 100, and then also Hengqin Island. These new areas are probably going to give people a new perspective about the future of the Pearl River Delta. But it's not only about connections, not only about the new towns. I think in order to truly accelerate the integration, there's other things we need to do. I think first, the most important thing, I think there still needs to do further cross-regional planning. This is very fundamental about economic planning, land use, infrastructure, transportation, ecological open space, as well as culture and tourism. Cities tend to compete with each other, particularly in this region, and they don't really have a lot of kind of a proactive communication. So this is very, very fundamental. The other thing is, of course, continues to do infrastructure, not only just rail and roadway, but we're talking about aviation, we're talking about port and marine. The other things, if you really want to truly integrate it, I think quality of life becomes fundamental. We talk about healthcare, we talk about senior living, we talk about the more and more cultural facility, and then also how to prevent the natural hazard to create a truly safe and healthy environment. Last but not least is really the software improvement. So I'm not going to go through this very details, and then I think later on we'll have a lot of time to have a good discussion. So this is my last slides. In order to accelerate, I think we really need to go beyond the just the traditional planning, design, and development. Is really understand how to take a holistic approach, a fully integrated approach. For example, don't just look at the railway. Look at the railway, how to integrate it with economic development. Look at how to integrate it with the urban development, particularly on the train stations. It really create a very livable and healthy place for citizens to live, and then for people to come and invest, and to celebrate the local southern, Chinese culture, Asian culture, as well as international culture, and then have a good visitors comfort zone, as well as a very healthy environment. So that's my quick few minutes to talk about my point. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you. Thanks, Sean. I think Sean is the only one with slides, so the only one to avail himself of the lectern. The rest can be done seated, casual. And Rick, I'll go to you next.
Great. Good afternoon. I'm Rick Vogel. I'm the president of Silverstein China. Silverstein Properties is a real estate investment, development, and management firm headquartered in New York City. The firm was founded by Larry Silverstein back in 1957, and he is synonymous with the name of the World Trade Center project. Mr. Silverstein bought the property just 6 weeks before the terrorists flew planes into them, which marked one of the worst days in the United States history, but actually became the beginning of the regeneration of Lower Manhattan that Mr. Silverstein led with the redevelopment of the World Trade Center project. About a year and a half ago, about a year ago, we opened the office in Shanghai. We've been looking at China for several years before that. We spent a long time looking at different parts of China as far as where we wanted to plant our flag, and we chose Qinghai in Shenzhen. And I'll be talking about why we're there and why we chose that location, and a lot about what excites me about what's happening in the PRD. I've been involved in China for about 15 years, and after everything I've seen, I actually think that what's happening in the PRD is probably the most exciting part of the growth in China.
Great. Fuzong, can you give an opening statement?
不好意思，首先，今天我从上午到现在，基本上没有用中文能讲的，这个我只能用中文，因为我不会英文，我只会中文和日文。但是今天谈的这个话题，其实从我个人来说，还是有很多的感受。简单的介绍一下我自己的经历，我是83年到了深圳，也就当时改革开放刚刚开始的4个经济特区的时候。我从北京到了深圳，当时我是作为一个建筑师，我离开深圳市应该是91年。那么那个时候的整个深圳的发展和4个特区的一个最后的一个状态，其实大家都很清楚。其实这个位置跟这个珠三角当中的一个位置，就是它跟香港的关系，它跟广州的关系。那么今天讲到这个珠三角。大家很少就会提到，比如是当时的还有一个特区，比如是汕头。那厦门当然现在还可以。它同样跟那个这个澳门紧接的是珠海。那珠海的明显要比这个深圳要落后很多，就是它的这个就是所谓的落后，就是它的量要小很多。那么刚才那个乔先生，这个里面有很多的数据啊。那我从我个人的角度来说呢，就是其实。这个改革开放这么段时间，到了今天，实际上是走上了一个拐点的一个节点的一个地方。有的说是2015年，是吧？走上一个拐点。所谓的由于改革开放以后，整个珠三角作为一个加工的一个出口基地，那么整个这个起来了。那么应该说，在世界上整个世界上来看，就是这种超巨大的城市，在一个地区有3个同时成立的，几乎是没有的。据我所知是没有的，都是虽然香港没有到1000万，但它的能量是超过1000万。深圳已经超过1000万了，广州也超过1000万了。1000万以上的城市有2个，所以它这个条件是非常非常独特的。那未来肯定也会继续要发展，只是说这个发展的方式跟前30年是不一样了。这是我作为一个规划这个专业和我们这个公司作为开发的这么一个角度去看这个整个这个市场。这个里面比较特殊的一个呢，我想举这个东莞这个例子。因为东莞我最早去那个80年代去东莞的时候，那基本上就是一些散落的村庄。那现在事实上我们广深就是万科的广深区域里面，东莞公司是一个非常重要的一个公司。虽然我们在深圳本身还是应该占了比较好的一个位置，但是在深圳的市中心，我们万科其实的物业是不多的，但是在东莞不一样。因为什么道理呢？是东莞它是一个其实是小城市的一个群，虽然说是东莞，但是这个镇和镇都有点距离的。所以我想今天表达的就是未来的整个的珠三角的这个发展。一定会是大的巨型的大城市3个，再带着一群的小城市，所谓真正的城市群。这是一个非常非常典型的一个地区。应该说，像这种城市群的地区，在中国应该是从渤海到上海，周边的就是长三角和珠三角。那么这个问题在什么地方呢？问题就是现在是人口，因为在这个30年当中，由于加工业的这个来料加工业的发展。所以内地人大量的涌入的这个珠三角地区，因为经济的发展主要第一个就是人口， 这现在这个人口，由于在这个过程当中，实际上真正的没有把它真正定下来，那些人是流动的。那么当然，他们也是用非常低的收入在这里经过这个自己的辛勤劳动。那么这个地区，对吧，积累的这么大的一个财富，很可惜，这些人实际上是没有想到这些他所这个贡献出来的这么一个报酬。那么接下去的10年，我认为最重要的是怎么能够把这些人，或者是更多的人才能够吸引到这个地区。如果不保证这个人口量，那么所谓的经济其实大家都知道是没有一个基础的。那第二个呢，就是我觉得这个可能就是真正的城市群，而不像以前就是一争，对吧？一个产业或者怎么，其实真正的城市群。那么真正的城市群里面，刚才乔先生其实也说到了，就是事实上我们现在在城市的这个基础的这个设施方面还有很多的缺陷，因为当时只是来料加工区嘛。那么未来的10年可能是服务、公共交通、卫生、环境这个方面绝对是要有相当大的一个发展。这个服务的增长是未来10年最重要的一个增长的一个点。如果不把这个做好的话，有可能也就很困难。那么另外一个就当然是政策上面，我觉得这个有可能大多数是跟政府有关系的。就政策上，以前政府主要是服务于一些来料加工啊、那些招商啊那些，未来可能是真正的民生，那些人怎么服务于他，包括户口的问题啊，这个政策的很多的金融的问题。因为无论怎么说，珠三角是中国改革开放的一个桥头堡，又带了是不是香港的这么一个有利的一个条件，所以未来的10年怎么利用香港的有利的条件，继续深化就是整个我们向成熟社会走向的未来的这个成熟社会的一个过程当中，是一个很好的一个试验田，非常非常重要的一个试验田。那万科当然是毫无疑问是我们整个4个区域里面很重要的一个，就是我们的广深区域。那么在未来的整个的城市的就是更新方面，肯定会有很多的事情可以做，啊，不仅仅是光是住宅。我简单要么先讲这些。
Thank you very much. Very good statements. Michael, why don't you start with something, and then I'll open it up to Q&A here.
Okay, again, just briefly, Michael Enright, I have a professorship at the University of Hong Kong for the last 17 years, moved here in 1996, but actually here today more wearing one of my other hats, Enright, Scott & Associates. One of the things that firm does is sort of large competitiveness studies of nations, regions, cities, and in fact what originally brought me to Hong Kong was a project on how Hong Kong's economy would fare across the transition back to Chinese administration that we did in 1995-96. And one of the striking things at that time was that we looked at Hong Kong and said, Hong Kong is a city in the midst of a region, let's go explore the region. And when we went around to the various jurisdictions in the Pearl River Delta, not just the Guangzhous and the Shenzhens, but the Weizhous and the Zhaoqings and the Zhongmens, people said, who are you and where are you from? We've never met anybody from Hong Kong. And what was amazing at that time was the extent to which Hong Kong literally ended at the boundary and how few people in Hong Kong had ever explored what was going on in the region. About 5 years after that, we did a more detailed study of the interaction between Hong Kong and the Pearl River Delta. At that time, we helped coin the phrase Greater Pearl River Delta. The day we released our report, there were 135 Google hits on that term. Within 5 years, there were close to 500,000. Within 10 years, there were over 1 million. So we've been looking at the region for a long time. We've actually been fortunate to have been involved in a lot of the underlying planning and basic economic analysis that drove decisions about a lot of the infrastructure that's now being constructed. Another thing that we do, which is also relevant to this group, is that we also advise real estate companies, investors, and developers quite extensively on on their investments, because the interesting thing in this part of the world for anyone's making a large-scale long-term investment is not what does a city look like today, but what is that city going to look like in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time? How is the city going to stack up against its competitors? What economic roles is it going to play? Where within the cities are those roles going to play out? And then can the investor both benefit from understanding that, but also shape it through their own investments? And that's another thing we find quite exciting.
Great. All right, I'm going to start with some questions here. Sean, I'm going to go to you first.
Okay.
So the amount of infrastructure and urban planning that's been being completed in the PRD right now is truly massive. Right. So when you think about it, just from here to Guangzhou, you have the high-speed rail to Guangzhou, you have the new CBD in Guangzhou, the Pearl River new city. These things are absolute game changers for the region in terms of the way people move, the way people work, so forth and so on. So you are involved in a lot of these projects. How do you see them affecting kind of the overall region?
Well, I think again, I think it's a change of mindset rather than, Hong Kong is a springboard, or Hong Kong is the gateway, and then there's a bunch of small cities, and to let them grow. I think people gradually to understand, they really need to work together, and to better use their resources, because right now there's a lot of time they're competing with each other. It was not very well planned, a lot of wasteful kind of investment or development, rather than smart growth. They just grow without a clear direction. So they cause a lot of waste of resource as well as cause a lot of damage to the environment. It's not sustainable, So in the future, I think we're shaping up the skeletons, but I think it's really start to give a more detailed design or development, and then also give a strong character of this place, and to let the place to understand they're working together as a group of city regions rather than lots of cities.
Yeah. Very good. Fuzhong, I'm going to ask you a question which is very much real estate oriented. We're all real estate people. So China Vanke has a very good view on how this infrastructure is implemented in the region. And when you are aware of a new bridge or a new tunnel or a train station or a subway station, a major infrastructure node, if you will, how does that affect your site selection and the way you think about development kind of around these nodes? And what are the particular challenges of trying to deliver a project at the same time as this infrastructure?
这个刚才其实我讲到了这个未来要加强的一部分，当然包括高铁，包括主要的这个一些大桥，这个大城市和大城市之间的一个联系，有快速的联系。其实我觉得现在整个这个地区，如果它的密度是适当的话，它应该更多的发展这个轻轨。那轻轨的是生活上比较容易使用的一种公共交通工具。那么其实长三角在开始开发的时候，主要还是公路、高速公路。那么由于它是产业为主的，所以它的公路网的一种布置的方式，也不是一个真正的城市级的，或者是一种社区级的。那么我们也知道，就是在长三角当时的很多的大的社区，就是大的封闭社区，在国外基本上也很少的。美国有可能有 gate city 是吧？就是一个入口，有保安，进去有很大规模的一个社区。那么这一些方面呢，肯定是会有一些改变。那我认为就是刚才说的这个交通，我认为如果能够用轻轨进行一个整个城市群的联系，那万科未来肯定是在跟这个发展是完全是合拍的去做，因为以前没有这个条件。所以往往就是有公路通，甚至有的还不是通的非常那个，就往上来去投。那么也有成功的，也有不是很成功的。那未来就会更明确的、精确的，因为未来的市场肯定会比以前要更有风险性。 不是你投了以后就能卖得掉，所以会更理性，在经营上是会更去严谨的去论证。但是无论如何，由于这个配套的整体的这个上升了以后，跟开发的这个具体的项目和它的位置是紧密的相关的。尤其是我们以前纯粹做住宅，未来可能就不一定纯粹做住宅，可能是在综合的方面可能会考虑的会更多。这个也是从一个产业往生活，对吧？慢慢从现在的这个硬件到软件的这个服务为主的这么一个城市成熟的这个城市的转变当中很重要的一个变化。这也是万科这几年最明显的一个变化。那么在这个过程当中，可能还会有很多的摸索，很多的实践，它也不一定就是每一个能够成功。但是我们已经下定决心，在这个方面能够希望跟外部的资源进行一些友好的合作，能够做成一些我们以前没做过的东西。最近在东莞的一个商业设施还是做得不错的，包括前海的这个开发，我们万科也一起介入这个前期的一个规划和开发的一些合作的这个项目。那么从这个角度来说，应该说未来肯定是一个比较立体的、综合的对城市的一个升级换代的这么一个开发的模式了，而不像以前相对来说有点野蛮生长的感觉，是吧？
Great, thank you very much. So Rick, Mr. Fu talked about the Shanghai region of Shenzhen, which is in the new development area. I'm sure that you studied many areas along the eastern seaboard of China and maybe even inland, and that was the area that you chose. So I'm curious as to how and why you picked that as the entry point, and how's it going so far?
Thank you. Well, my work with Silverstein is actually my third try at building a real estate development company in China. And the one thing that I've learned along the way is where you start is where the leadership of Beijing wants you to start. And where that is, you start reading the 12-year plan, or the 5-year plan. And we have the 12th 5-year plan that we're under right now, which is focused on restructuring the economy, moving from a secondary economy to a tertiary economy. So the question you ask yourself is, where is that going to happen? Where is it going to happen first? And if you look at the major areas that logically that would begin, whether it's the Yangtze River Delta or the Pearl River Delta, in our opinion, the Pearl River Delta is going to be the biggest beneficiary of that policy, particularly with the cooperation that's underway right now with Hong Kong. In Shanghai, you have the unique situation where the government has organized a series of policies that's geared completely towards cooperating with Hong Kong. Hong Kong being a very well-known world finance center, over 90% of its economy is driven by the services industry. The policies in Shanghai are geared towards pulling both that knowledge base and that resource base into Shanghai, where the start of the modern services industry in China is going to begin. Xi Jinping signaled that when he made that his first stop. When he became the party secretary, he made his first stop in Shanghai and talked about how important that would be to this change and restructuring of the economy. But if you go beyond just the location and proximity to Hong Kong, and you look at the transformation that's happening right now in the Pearl River Delta, we're going from a low value add manufacturing base, was the world's factory for so many years, to now being a value added manufacturing base. Companies that showed up who focused primarily on pure manufacturing are now moving towards Western China, or unfortunately maybe even to other countries with lower wages. Shenzhen being, I think, the highest minimum wage in China, has pushed those manufacturing efforts outside of the PRD. But they're retooling. If you listen to what the former party secretary of Guangdong, Mr. Wang Yang, said over 4 years ago, he said, "We need to replace the bird but keep the cage." To me, that's what describes it there. There's such great infrastructure there, such great resource bases, but we have to retool as to what we're doing. So all these companies, even like Foxconn, when they moved their manufacturing to Western China, they retained a research center, a center for excellence in Shenzhen. So we're seeing how that's starting to evolve. What does that mean for the services industry? That means we need all of the financial firms, we need the accounting firms, the law firms that will support that growth, and particularly in technologies. Where is that going to happen? We think it's going to happen in Shanghai. When you look at a new development zone, you look for three things. You look for connectivity, you look for political will, and you look for just the ability to get the right policies in place to drive the markets. So let's start there, policies. We're seeing a 15% tax rate. We're seeing an opening up policy where they want to be able to allow companies in Shanghai to issue RMB denominated bonds in Hong Kong. They're freeing up the capital market. They're allowing money to flow more easily. It's going to be the center for the renminbi trade. These are all things, all policies that are going to drive the market, and it's going to drive it in Shanghai. Let's look at connectivity. Shanghai will be connected to 12 railways, many high-speed regional trains, including the Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Hong Kong high-speed train. 180 kilometers of freeways. We believe that the PRD area is going to become a car culture, so that connectivity is going to be very, very important. The statistics are that from the Shanghai transportation hub, which is being developed by the Shenzhen Metro, who are here with us today, you will be able to get to anywhere in the PRD within 1 hour. You'll be able to get to Hong Kong in 30 minutes. This is going to change the landscape. If you look at cities in the US, San Francisco, New York, Chicago, people commute to work in an hour from suburbs outside those cities. You'll be able to commute to city centers anywhere in the PRD on this rail network. Moving to implementation. When you go to Shanghai and you visit the visitor center, you see a very active government body who has set up their offices there, who are promoting the area, who are building infrastructure, who are cooperating with anyone who walks in the door who wants to do business there. They're there, they've got a beautiful office set up, a strong marketing center. They're there to do business, and they're well organized. So when you look at connectivity, the political will, and how things will get implemented into policies, that's why we chose it. And we found a great partner there with QIEFC, who's also here with us today. But maybe more importantly, had we started our business in Shanghai, we would have been among many other international developers with very large, well-developed projects. In Shenzhen and in the PRD, we're the first international real estate developer to be there. We're developing the waterfront site. It's the postcard image of Shenzhen, and we hope we can really have a huge impact there. So that's the main reasons why we're there.
You must be in pre-marketing already. I'm sold. Why would you go anywhere else then? Well done. So, Michael, I'm going to pick up on some themes of Rick. Over the past 35 years, because of infrastructure deployment, economic policies, there's been a complete transformation in the region already. And when you look at kind of these new initiatives, there really is, we're at the start of another transformation. So 10 years from now, can you paint the picture of what the PRD, how it's going to feel, look, behave in terms of these changes, how they affect the way people do business, societal changes, things of that nature?
Sure. In order to look forward, it actually does make sense to take a little time looking backward. I mean, we have to recall that when China started to open, the PRD was one of the least developed, one of the most backward areas. Just again, some random numbers. If you trace the GDP in current US dollars, 1980, $8 billion, 2000, $89 billion, 2012, $776 billion US dollars. This year will cross $900 billion US dollars. And by 2020, we estimate that the PRD, and this is not including Hong Kong and Macau, just the jurisdictions of the portion of Guangdong province, the 40,000 square kilometers of Guangdong province, will be about 1.3 trillion US dollars by 2020 and maybe 2 trillion by 2030. And there are only about 5 or 6 national economies in the world that are that size these days. Population back in 1980 of the PRD was about 17 million. Fast forward to Sean's statistics of the current permanent population of about 57 million. We actually estimate, when you throw in the migrant workers, that you're well over 70, probably 75 million. So the transformation has been absolutely enormous, and it's been virtually from scratch. Connectivity has been absolutely key to the region, and this is one of the few places in the world where you can actually put a dollar value to connectivity. Okay? 1980, China starts to open. It declares a special economic zone in Shenzhen. It declares a special economic zone in Zhuhai, just north of Macau. At that time, 1980, the combined GDPs of Zhuhai and Zhongshan, the two jurisdictions just north of Macau, was slightly greater than the combined GDPs of Shenzhen and Dongguan, the two jurisdictions just north of Hong Kong. By 2002, that differential was over 80 billion US dollars a year. That was all traceable to trade performance. The trade performance was all traceable to foreign investment, and the foreign investment was all based on where you could get from Hong Kong via Mercedes, Audi, or BMW in 2 to 3 hours. Because even though you could take the ferry across, the key decision makers who make those investments, they don't take the ferry. They take the Merc, they take the Audi. And if you fast forward that to 2012, oh, by the way, in 2002, when we showed that analysis to the financial secretary, he said, now I get it. And within about 48 hours, Hong Kong government policy had changed from thinking about maybe starting to investigate whether or not to do a bridge across to Zhuhai and Macau in the year 2015, start the investigation, to maybe we ought to do this quicker. Because in fact, we told them, look, you close that GDP gap by 10%, that's 8 billion a year, US dollars, just for those two jurisdictions in China. And when we were asked, what does it mean for Hong Kong? We said, expand exports of trade-related services and transportation services by just 10%. It's 2.5 billion US dollars in GDP and 55,000 jobs to Hong Kong. They said, oops, we get it. Then Guangzhou managed to block it for 7 years. So unfortunately, Sean's world, where we all work and play together in the region, that doesn't exist, and if you invest on that basis, you're going to be waiting a long, long time. You have to think about a region where Shenzhen tries to steal from Hong Kong, Dongguan tries to steal from Shenzhen, and Guangzhou tries to steal from everybody. Believe me. Fast forward, what's it going to look like? Yeah. Within 15, 20 years, what you're going to see is a single urban ring that starts in Hong Kong, goes all the way around to Macau, and then back across the bridge. The east side of the delta, a lot of that is already there. The west side of the delta, it's just starting. You're going to see brand new city centers, not only in Guangzhou, which you'd think first-tier city. Why do we need a new city center? They need it because they're developing too rapidly or so rapidly. You'll see new city centers in Shenzhen. You'll see new city centers in Dongguan. And you'll see massive city centers in cities that never really had centers before, such as Foshan and Zhongshan. And in Hengqin Island, what you're likely to see is the satellite service sector servicing the manufacturing in the west part of the delta. And a lot of the labor-intensive manufacturing that will shift out of the eastern part of the delta will go across first to the west part of the delta, which means actually the development of the west part of the delta may be faster than the development on the east side was. So you're going to see an inner urban ring where you can get to anywhere between an hour and 2 hours. Okay. That's going to all be developed into high-end service residential. That's going to support a manufacturing hinterland. We're going to have a population in the region up from the 56, 57,000 official population to 75, 80 million people. You're going to see a GDP, again, within less than 20 years of 2 trillion US before you add in Macau, before you add in Hong Kong. It's going to be a completely different place. Okay. And when you think about where it fits in China's development, when NDRC released in November 2008 the guidelines for the further development of the Pearl River Delta, it's actually a very interesting document. You should read it. I was in Shanghai that day, and the headline on the front page of the English language edition of Shanghai Daily was Pearl River Delta to continue in the vanguard of China's development. I can tell you no editor in Shanghai voluntarily put that on the front page.
That's amazing. I read recently, I don't know if this is true, but the 12th five-year plan has a chapter devoted to the PRD. The 11th had a paragraph reference, and the 10th had a one-sentence reference to Hong Kong. So it is a major mind shift. I have a question, speaking of Hong Kong, I have a question for Mr. Fu. You have a major development site in Hong Kong, the waterfront site near Tsuen Wan West Station. So Vanke is on the on the vanguard of mainland Chinese developers that are investing in Hong Kong and actually in the rest of the world, major projects in the US and now Europe. So how do you think about Hong Kong as kind of the gateway city to the PRD? What is your strategy for investing in Hong Kong?
应该说，进出香港主要还是从融资的角度来说，可能考虑的更多一点。因为往外这个投资主要还是一个钱怎么出去的问题。所以当时第一个在香港的桥头堡实际上是一个融资的一个考虑。那么收购了一个公司了以后，现在我们在全湾，其实这个是一个不大的项目，才4万多平米，2栋楼。但无论如何呢，通过在香港的这个投资过程当中，现在其实已经折腾了半年了，还是有很多的这个有意思的这个现象。因为我们在国内开发的时间长了以后，这国内的一套这个开发的模式会比较熟悉一点，但是香港是完全不一样的。虽然这里讲的也是中文，但是它的一套规矩完全是英式的，就是原来英国的这过来的，所以这个其实对万科来说是抱着一个学习的一个态度来的。那至于走上国际化是吧？因为我们的董事长现在从美国的哈佛，现在又跑到了英国的剑桥。那事实上他就是觉得，一个是圆自己的留学梦嘛，另外一个就是这个真正的跑到外面去，才能感受到这个世界到底是怎么个状态。得出一个结论，就是外面的世界其实是很好赚钱，比国内还要容易赚钱。说是这么说了，但是我们的基地可能还是在中国。那么现在在美国纽约有一个，在旧金山有一个，在新加坡也有一个，事实上还是很少的。最近你们可以注意一下，我们万科是一个进出海外的一个应该说是一个开发商。其实进出海外的开发商现在已经有很多了。前几天我在上海碰到正大的那个戴志康先生，他说在南非搞了个150公里平方公里的一个项目，吓我一跳。就说明什么意思呢？就是现在大家可能是觉得进出海外是一个很好的一个机会吧，但是万科还是一个脚踏实地的吧，应该尤其是进出海外，基本上是带着学习的一个态度。到了美国，其实我们只是一个出一点资，真正的操作还是在美国的这个原来这个美国的团队在操作的。那么希望通过进出海外，能够学习先进国家的一些管理和开发的经验，拿回来。因为我们下半场中国肯定也不是以前的这种做法了，可能会越来越严谨，越来越科学。主要是这个目的。香港是比较特殊，是因为还有一个融资的这么一个渠道在这里。
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that Vanke is here to learn, but you should know that everybody considers your company as a very fast learner. So, Sean, I want to come to you. Speaking of speed, the ability of the PRD to implement infrastructure is breathtakingly fast from the standpoint of somebody from the US. And in fact, throughout China, it's incredible the speed. I would say it's only in the Guangdong province or Hong Kong where people can complain about delays of XYZ infrastructure project where kind of in the context of global implementation, it's lightning fast. So what would you say, you're an expert in the construction of these major projects, what are the lessons learned or best practices that other cities and regions throughout the world could learn from? And also, what are the challenges that you face here that other regions might not?
Well, I think the speed, definitely everybody understands, but to a certain point, there's a lot of things, they're not fast enough to catch up. You know, we talk a lot about connectivities. You see freeway, you see high-speed rail, you see hardcore infrastructure, but actually there's a lot of different kind of infrastructure need to be upgraded. You know, we're talking about healthcare. It's a major problem, the hospitals, the quality of healthcare services. We talk about education. we talk about senior cares, we talk about cultural facility development. We may have museum, we may have the opera house, but the contents, the curation of the art program, it's still very, very behind the schedule. I think that's something, if you really want to move forward as quick as the infrastructure, you really have to somehow find a way to invest further on the software, training the people, upgrade the education, and then the other thing is really improve the environment. For the few years ago, a lot of our colleagues, it's very hard for us to attract talented people in Shenzhen. All our senior designers, they want to work either in Shanghai or Beijing. But these days, things have kind of changed. One of the major reasons is they appreciate the air quality of Shenzhen more than Shanghai and Beijing. They realize, oh my God, we're so lucky we live in Shenzhen. Every day you see the WeChat, oh, today is the weather, the air quality, oh, the Beijing or Shanghai. And then they realize fundamental quality of life is really about the quality of the environment. The food security, everybody knows, everybody's really concerned about the quality of the food. It's not the price, but there's a lot of scary stories about the safety of the food, and then the water, and then even the soil they live. We know there's a lot of industrial site without cleaning the land, they just build things on top of it. And then maybe 30 years down the road or 10 years down the road, you start to see diseases or severe illness to happen. And people start to understand that it's not only about roadway connect people, you really need to start to improve the quality of your lifestyle or the living environment. Okay. I think this is something we have a lot of things to catch up.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Okay, thanks. All right, a lot of Hong Kongese wonder about this. I know I certainly do. A very specific project that, Rick, I'd love for you to comment on, which is the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge. And it's interesting, you're focused in Shenzhen, and I'm curious about the circulation patterns, how it's going to affect where manufacturers locate, so forth and so on. What do you see as the impact of that bridge?
Yeah. We looked at that very carefully as well before we chose Qinghai. If you look at the Hong Kong-Zhuhai Bridge, it's a 42-kilometer long bridge. For those of you from the U.S., that's a little longer than the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. It's going to be finished in 2016. When you go to Zhuhai today, you'd see what you would perceive to, I would describe as a fairly low-income city, albeit right next to Macau with visitors of 30 million per year. It's kind of separate from that because of the border. When this bridge gets built, it's going to convert what is today about a 4-hour car drive. If you drove from Zhuhai all the way up, around, and down to Hong Kong, about a 4-hour drive, to a 45-minute drive. So what does that do? It immediately makes Zhuhai a place that people would want to live. It's within a commuting radius of central Hong Kong or other parts of the PRD. It's going to allow manufacturers of things like electronics and technology, which rely on speed to store delivery, to be able to get shipments to the Hong Kong airport in 45 minutes. That's going to change the manufacturing base there. If you look at the Shenzhen-Zhongshan corridor, that's a 51-kilometer long corridor. That will be finished in 2021. Similar thing, it's giving us access to the Western Bank, where we can still find affordable real estate, affordable labor, to be able to maintain some of the core manufacturing industries in the PRD, while the East Bank is pursuing these higher value-add and service industries. So when we looked at the Hongqian Island, we were impressed with the residential component, certainly the entertainment and leisure component. If any of you have been to the Chimelong Park there, it's almost like Disneyland in scale and intensity. And we looked at the manufacturing and logistics that goes with that, but we couldn't see the argument for core office CBD. I know Michael mentioned, I agree with him, probably the service sector will be there to serve the manufacturing base there, but not for the type of project we were looking for, which requires a much more robust city center.
Yep, great. I'm going to ask one more question of our panelists, and then I'm going to open it up for Q&A. And if there's not Q&A, we'll get back on the time schedule a little bit, but hopefully that there is, because I'm interested. So Michael, can you comment on the ongoing transformation of the PRD relative to the same that's occurring in the Yangtze River Delta and the Bohai Rim? And what advantages do you think that Hong Kong brings as kind of a gateway city to the PRD relative to the gateway city of those regions?
Okay. Again, in terms of rough comparisons, what is called Greater Pearl River Delta, Hong Kong, Macau, plus the 9 jurisdictions in the PRD, that's about 40,000 square kilometers. I told you GDP this year will probably pass about 900 billion US. Yangtze River Delta is over 200,000 square kilometers. It's more than twice the population. Its GDP is about 40% higher. Bohai, if you take Tianjin, Beijing, and all of Hebei province, is about the same population as the YRD. Only that's about, well, it's about 300,000 square kilometers, and it's about 109 million people, with a GDP this year of just under 1 trillion. So in terms of overall size of economies and populations, you know, there's some matching there. In terms of economic throw weight, the Yangtze River Delta is the largest economic region in China and will be forever. 4 times the size, more than twice the population. And its trajectory, you know, since the onset of reform, particularly since 1990, has been actually quite similar in terms of growth rates in Yangtze River Delta and Pearl River Delta. These are complementary centers for the most part, not competing, in that each benefits dramatically from the other. What Hong Kong has, of course, is free flow of information, free flow of people, free flow of currency, international convertibility, legal systems that we would all recognize, plus a set of business standards that is just still a bit different. And these things all continue to be advantages. And the sort of entrepreneurship here and the spirit that we have here and the ease of action. Again, I spent a lot of time in Shanghai. I spent a lot of time in Beijing. I still find it much, much easier to operate in Hong Kong. I find the information flows are better. And in particular, the information flows between Hong Kong and not 1 or 2 Chinese cities, but when you start worrying about 30, 40, 50 Chinese cities, I find the information flows much better between Hong Kong and those cities than I do Beijing or Shanghai. So again, China needs more than one great economic region, and this will be one, and Hong Kong plays important roles.
Great, terrific, thank you. Any questions from the crowd? There's one right on the aisle here.
Good afternoon. Michael Kleibeiner from JLL. Professor Enright, I wanted to ask you a question about from a real estate perspective, when we've looked at how much office space is going to be constructed in this region in the next 10 to 15 years, you look at CBD2 in Hong Kong, and then you have CBD3 and Lantau Island. You've got Hengqin Island, Nanshan, Foshan, Dongguan. You've got, Qinghai, Futian, Zhiqiang New Town, New Finance City in Guangzhou, and others that I, haven't mentioned. You're looking at maybe 20, 25 million square meters of office space. And you're suggesting that GDP might double between now and 2030. When we think about, like the topic of this panel, the integration of the region, is integration going to mean cooperation, or is it going to mean actually fierce competition between these jurisdictions in order to be successful, to grow into the bones that they're building now?
The short answer is both. What we are seeing is basically forced down from Beijing, because the people in Beijing, the people in NDRC, they understand this. They're pressing the jurisdictions in the PRD to cooperate with Hong Kong. Qinghai has been carved out as a very specific area, mandated by central government, not provincial government, to be a real test case. Shenzhen increasingly sees the benefits of cooperating with Hong Kong. Dongguan, to a certain extent, Zhuhai definitely. Foshan getting there, Guangzhou would still rather be the center of the universe. So what I think we'll see is we'll see cooperation on the major infrastructure pieces at long last, because that message has finally gotten through. We'll see some cooperation in terms of planning and reduction of frictions cross-boundary. And then what we'll see is we'll see a lot of competition, and the market will decide. Again, as was mentioned before, Rick was saying, well, they don't see Zhiqiang as a high-end service center. And, for the time being, that's right, because it'll be outcompeted by other places. So when you see lots of places, you'll see the same industries being targeted, you'll see the same policies put in place, and that means ultimately the market will sort it out. What we envision is Hong Kong as the high-end, internationally oriented service center. We see Shenzhen as having a lot of the second-tier services, the high-value manufacturing-related services, and so on. Guangzhou, the administrative. Zhiqiang, the sort of satellite service center for the manufacturing and other business on the west side of the Delta. And when you start looking at it that way, then you start seeing, okay, we have certain populations, their affluence is reaching certain levels where it makes sense to have a CBD. We did some analysis in Foshan several years ago that showed that Foshan was the only city in the PRD where the vast majority of the industrial output was by indigenous companies, but they were selling under somebody else's brand, somebody else's label. That means they didn't need office space. They kept the office at the factory. They didn't have marketing, they didn't have finance, they didn't have to connect internationally. Now those companies want to sell internationally and nationally under their own brand. Now they need marketing, now they need finance, now they need international connectivity, now they need a CBD in a city that never had one. So you really have to break it down city by city, what the functions are going to be. There's going to be a ton of office space, and like everything in China, it'll be overbuilt. Will there be a boom and a bust? Absolutely. But then you'll see it fill up, and it depends on the hold period. People who've got a 2-year hold period, you take your chances. People who've got a 5-year hold period, interesting. People who've got an 8 to 10-year hold period, almost anywhere in the region's probably a pretty good investment.
Well, that's a great last sentence, in my view. All right. Thank you. Thanks to the panelists.